Yes. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Very excited this evening. More reasons than one. And it's going to be a new format moving forward. For those of you who have been following my story over the last couple of years, you'll realize that I've kind of just taken you through a journey that is somewhat personal, but kind of reflective of small town country youth, Jamaica. However, we're going to dampen the excitement just a little bit this evening in an effort to pay tribute to a man who was very impactful on the lives of many youths who went to Titchfield High School. The man, the iconic Zacali, Carlton Spalding. Now, I knew Zacali before I even went to Titchfield, because I used to go with my mother over to Mr. Marshall, the attorney, the barrister, who used to have an office cross from Brooks Yard, Summerstone Road, next to Tom Lee, near Miss Fraser shop there, right at Bonneview here. So I knew Mr. Colley just before I went to Titchfield. And then when I went to Titchfield, Mr. Colley must have been there maybe a year or so. And we built a very good relationship. And Mr. Colley was hilarious. This man had a sense of humor that you could have connected with anybody, any walk of life, anywhere, anytime, anyhow. So with that, the entire school community mourned the loss of Mr. Colley last week. I want to just take this opportunity to just pay tribute. And we invited his son, Dennis, to give a few words. So Dennis, are you there? Dennis, we've gone through some technical difficulties with Dennis last week in an effort to kind of pay a tribute to Mr. Colley. But anyway, regardless, Dennis experiencing some difficulties there, and we're not gonna tarry for too long, hoping that Dennis can make some kind of connection. So Dennis, we are reaching out to you. Are you there? Dennis? Dennis?
This is connecting to audio.
Yes, Dennis, are you there? Don't fail me, Dennis. Counting to 10 on you this time, Dennis. I'm hoping that you can connect. Dennis, what's going on with the audio? All right, so continuing, Mr. Colley was one of them man who he ran a talk shop for many years. I think Mr. Colley came to Titchfield in 1969 or thereabout, and he was good friends with Tom Lee from the infamous Tom Lee Party Place, and Mr. Tom Lee had asked him to come and help to run the talk shop at that time. So with that, we just want to take this opportunity to once again reach out to the family of Mr. Colley, Carlton Spalding, and express our condolences on behalf of the Port Antonio, Portland, Titchfield community in the passing of Mr. Colley last week. So we move on. So the new format is going to be primarily like an open discussion about small town Jamaica and how the bigger picture of the influence of small town characters and institutions and how Jamaica was built on that premise. Because a lot of people are of the notion that the only important places in Jamaica are probably Montego Bay and Kingston. And while Port Antonio might have been one of those places that was lost in the development shuffle, like Lucy and Falmouth over the years, and many other small towns. But in a manner of speaking, how Port Antonio, the Portland community, Titchfield, has influenced things like festival, dance, art, and in particular music. So this journey now is going to encompass all of that. And with that, I invited a guest, a special guest, to kind of just give us a different perspective, a generationally different perspective from the one that I might have had, so that we can get a kind of better grasp initially as we move forward with this journey and this discussion as to how Port Antonio, as small as it is, however unique in its flora its fauna, the ocean, the rivers, the streams, the birds, bees. How Port Antonio, Portland, the mecca of warmth and hospitality. How Port Antonio, Portland is the getaway for many, not necessarily rich and famous, but just many, regardless of the fact that the development has been somewhat stagnant. But we embrace the uniqueness of our tranquil and idyllic space we call Port Antonio, Portland. So, my special guest today is from a family, a notable family in the Port Antonio area, the Anderson family. And for those of you who would have trod Summerstone Road going on to William Street or going on to Harbour Street, would always see Miss Andy on the veranda. And don't believe that you can walk past Miss Andy and don't say good morning and don't think that she don't recognize you. And Mr. Anderson, the patriarch, was a sergeant in the Jamaica Constabulary Force. However, I didn't really come in contact with many of the Anderson brothers and sisters. I knew Grace was a head girl at one time. But my one interaction with Anderson was Carl. Carl was a prefect and I was a road boy. And Carl and I would hit heads all the time. But Carl, at one point in time, Carl gave me lines to write. I don't know what it was, because remember now, when I was in high school, bad word cussing was part and parcel of my daily regimen. I was like a designer, the architect of bad word cussing. I don't know what happened or my life changed around. I found something, but that is not my public persona. Does not engage that vernacular that much. But anyway, Carl gave us 500 lines to write in a man. And the man would not give me a break. I begged the man from morning till night, and the man would not give me a break. So when you reach all 150, you still have 350 lines to go in. It's not the question of learning and lesson from your mistakes, It's how your hand tired from the writing. So that was one of my only interaction on a negative level. And at this point in time, things turned out pretty decent for me in terms of my character. So that's all right. So, Roy Anderson. So that is Andy and Corporal Andy. Went from infant school to Titchfield. Went to UWI, studied history, came back to Titchfield as a teacher. And then he taught English and history at Titchfield. And then he went back to UWI. Well, actually, he went to do his law degree at the University of London. And then he came back and lectured at UWI for a few years. And then he was called to be a judge in Jamaica. But he had actually migrated to the US and then came back. And then he was invited to serve on the bench from 2001 to 2012. Now he's retired. And I still think he's busy in some organizations in Jamaica. So he's one of Port Antonio, Portland, Titchfield's academics, intellectuals, man of high character, unsurpassed, as part of the entire Anderson family, of that matter. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Justice Roy Anderson, who's going to bring a slightly different perspective from where we will build our conversation as we move forward in this journey. And Justice Anderson, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to this talk show / podcast that we're hoping will open the hearts and minds of not only Portlanders, not only Titchfield people, not only Jamaicans, but people all over the world who can try to get a perspective as to how small town lives, the lives of small town people, are impactful in a way that sometimes you just can't put your finger on it and measure it. So, Honorable Justice Roy Anderson, Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Paul. Paul, you prefer Paul or Paca?
As long as you spell it right, it doesn't matter, sir.
Thanks for the welcome. It's a really great privilege. I have watched with great interest your little podcast, you might call them, talking about your growing up in Port Antonio. And I think perhaps the first thing that struck me is that, you know, going back as I do to the days of growing up with your older brother Hugh, I probably knew more about you than you didn't know about you at certain times of his life. So it's a great privilege for me to take part in this. I see Joel looking on and Joel being part of this, and I'm thinking that, you know, when I was a little boy at Titchfield, and before I went to Titchfield, if your name Mu Young, you're a real Chinese, you know, like Early and Ricky and Trevor and so on. But yeah, times have certainly changed. I think for me, basically coming out of my own experience and where I am now in my life, it's just a tremendous thrill to look back on the evolution of life in Port Antonio and how it has impacted me as an individual and who is able to make a contribution to development nationally and internationally. You see, I like to think of myself as being a part of the bridge between that post-World War II generation who were at Titchfield in the late 1940s and the post-independence generation who came to school in the 60s and 70s and so on. And it's critical to understand the link because my own experience of that time, as time evolved in Port Antonio, very much reflects the whole changing colonial structure internationally. You know, the independence of African nations, independence of Caribbean nations, the end of the colonial era, the end of the British Empire as we knew it. As Mr. Churchill said, he didn't become prime minister to preside over the dissolution of the empire, but he did. Because, you know, by the time he had left, the empire was at an end. But the fact is that growing up in Port Antonio, I had a kind of bird's eye view of this because I grew up, I spent my 10th birthday at Harbour Street right in front of the Anglican Church. We moved there on the 31st of March, 1950. I was then 9 years old. You can work out the maths how old I am now. And we lived there until, my mother lived there, in fact, until she died in 2008. That was the family home. And it was kind of the home of the Andersons from home and abroad, because whenever they came, they had to come to Port Antonio to pay homage. She was the last of the surviving, one of the last of the surviving of that generation of my dad, his siblings and their spouses. So, but I also, coming to Titchfield in 1953, I was able to, and because when I went to infant school, it was on the Titchfield premises. Okay, I went there as a four-year-old. I did my entire schooling on those premises. Infant school, elementary school, high school, went away, came back, taught there. So it's very much a part of who I am.
Absolutely.
So the fact is that one of the things I was able to observe is, I know some of the younger generation might take it for granted, we talk about up the hill. When we were growing up as 8, 9, and 10-year-old children, up the hill was said in hushed tones because there were only certain people who lived up on the hill, with the exception of a few like the Ashmeads, but generally there were only certain people who lived on the hill. People like the United Fruit Company general manager who lived on the hill, or the wharfinger, Mr. Maxwell, who lived on the hill. And, I reminded the chat the other day that I'm old enough to remember in the days coming in infant school, when 2 days in May, the road would be blocked off on Foreshore, what's now Foreshore Road, Allen Avenue. And it would be blocked off on Fort George Street beyond about where the Anglican Rectory is. And you had to go up Fort George Street turn and go down what we then call King Street Gully, because Allen Avenue was a private road, and it was not intended that the so-called working classes were supposed to get a right of way to be able to walk on those streets at any time. Of course, by the time I got to Titchfield, that had changed. But the fact is that the evolution that I was able to witness as a young boy growing up in Brunswick, seeing what we might call the colonial classes ruling from the hill and telling us from downtown how to behave and so on, until when I got back there in 1966 as a teacher, understanding that the world had changed. Independence had come, the world had changed, colonialism was a bad word now and things are in the past. But we one of the things we recognize is that this Titchfield didn't start with 1962 or 1959. We're going back 1776, well over 200 years, 240 years. And there have been contributions of people before my time, fortunately, who I'm aware of. I don't know how many people, for example, know that perhaps the originator of water sports in Jamaica as a tourist attraction was pretty much originated by Ernest Matt, a boy from down on West Street. Grew up as one of the smart boys, went to Titchfield. Don't think Ernie ever passed in at Cambridge, but he became an outstanding entrepreneur. I don't know how many people know that. But apart from that, people like my generation, we were taught, we recognized that there were people like Manly West, an internationally recognized pharmacologist who was one of the developers of Anusol and Canusol, which are drugs now internationally used for things like asthma and treatment of people who are doing chemotherapy. And so we recognize that there was a history there. There was a history, and you became a part of that history, and you get caught up in it. But one of the things that I like to think about as growing up in a small town was the touch that I had with everybody in Toronto. And it made me who I am. It made me realize that it didn't matter where you were from. It was mattered what you had in mind and where you wanted to go.
Absolutely.
It was natural for me growing up on Harbour Street to walk down West Street and go down to Bombrook and watch youngsters and Surrey play at the Bombrook Oval. And not only that, you knew by first name who, in those days when the warships would come to Burlington, you knew who the famous prostitutes were. You knew them by name because they were all well known to us. It's just a part of who you grew up to be. And the fact is that they knew you too. What is important is that they knew you. And if they saw you, if one of them saw you stepping out the line, them say, Miss Andy, son, you're not supposed to do that place, You're not supposed to not place your son. Understand? Right. They knew that there was a divide, but they understood the way in which we were all connected, yes, and that we all helped each other as we grew up. So I was just fascinated by that time of growing up in Portland. I remember when I got what was then called doing scholarship exam in 1952 to go to Titchfield. 7 of us got scholarships. The rest of people paid. 7 of us, including myself, Earl Wright, and a couple of other guys, got scholarships. Gloria Barrett was one. She went off to St. Andrew High School in Kingston. But, and we all went to Miss Pearson, who was then Mrs. Young, then Mrs. Pearson, to do private lessons at $1 a week.
So
in the days when you had a helper and you paid her 7 shillings for the week,
Right.
So it's fascinating. It's just fascinating. I just get excited just thinking about that evolution and
right.
How it affects.
So in essence, what Justice Anderson is basically laying out for us is the historical context as to how small towns, and remember now, Port Antonio is only a microcosm of all small towns Jamaica. There's nothing, while we feel this uniqueness, small town worldwide, small towns Jamaica, have their little nuances that they bring to the table. Sometimes we don't pay much attention to it, but they are so important in nation building. Because when we look at all the influences, what we call influencers now, from academia to music to dance to art, to whole question of the festival competition, singing and dancing and so on in festival. Just little things like that. And we're not even touching on anything like agriculture, we're not touching on anything like that. But the essence of this program is going to be exploring in depth how, again, as I said before, how small towns worldwide, small towns in Jamaica in particular, have this unique approach to the influence on nation building. And this journey cannot be cut short, because while we are bombarded with what I call foolishness all day long, the susu, the gossip, the bad behavior, and while we have important issues to deal with like the pandemic and politics, and not to mention crime and violence, this particular program is not going to touch in a very serious way a lot of those issues, because my basic philosophy is if we don't bring a solution to the table, sometimes it's easier we just talk about it in a manner that is not, pressing somebody else to kind of become too vociferous and angry. But we can open up the table to all and sundry to have an open forum at some point in time. So Justice Anderson, it is a pleasure introducing you to this format. I'm hoping that for another 4 shows or so, we'll be doing this weekly, Monday nights at 8 o'clock. And for another 4 shows or so, we're gonna ask you to join us so that we can continue the discussion. But I just want to make it abundantly clear that while Port Antonio is filled with its characters, and when I say characters, no General Hospital, no Days of Our Lives, no Bonanza, no High Chaparral, don't have anything on Port Antonio when it comes to the susu and the bad behavior. But we're not going to touch it on this particular program. we're going to keep it airy, we're going to keep it light, we're going to keep it humorous in part, but we're going to just impart some knowledge. Because I know there are many people in the diaspora who yearn. We're not talking about living in the past. We never, ever, ever talk about living in the past. Because remember now, there are some memories of the past that are hurtful, that are burning, that are filled with issues that we have to bring to the world at some point in time. But people want to reminisce and kind of just have a jocular approach to some of the things that we took for granted as youths. Whether it's a cutlery truck, whether it's playing the drain as dirty as the drain was and that were about ringworm, whether it's making, your push wheel, whether you're playing with marble, whether it's watch a movie from somebody from the street, on somebody telephone TV, whether I carry, but Delmar Theatre or Capital Theatre, Triple Bill on a Friday night. Yeah, man, whether it's a compound, whether it's roof, whether it's Radius Road, up a Wayne Road, without Folly, without Prospect, dance go on somewhere. People like to know so they can reminisce and think about some of those things. They bring some warmth to us, but we can bring it in a perspective from Mr. Justice Anderson's perspective, from my perspective, and moving forward, I will be bringing on artists, I will be bringing on musicians, I will be bringing on people who talk about the dance culture, people who talk about how they have influenced NBTC, coming straight out of Port Antonio there. Yes. So, once again, I'm looking for the support. We are looking for the support because at some point in time, we want to take this on a different, and we want to move it forward. We want to move it forward, but strictly positive vibrations moving forward. Energy here is going to be light and airy and jocular, and we're going to laugh. Invariably, we might have to cry because laughter and crying is part and parcel of some of the same emotions. But at the end of the day, we're hoping that this introduction to Port Antonio on a different level will make it meaningful for all the people who tune in. And once again, as I always say, as you go through, try and minimize the amount of harm that you cause. And while we can change the world, we can clean up our little corner. Yeah, man. With that, walk good and take it easy.